I want to talk about Francis Bacon's video, who is, by the way, a very hard conservative. He was gay, but he was also a conservative. So I don't agree on him about his politics, but I still love his art nonetheless. Because a lot of people think that I only like leftist artists and criticize me for that. Bacon was a conservative, and I think this ties a bit to his insecurity. And we talked about I talked about male insecurity turning a lot to violence in the video, and I was thinking we could expand on that and have a conversation about male fragility or male insecurity in relation to violence, because insecurity in general will lead to emotional outbursts. Typically in women, when people say, "Oh, well, women are much more emotional than men," what they mean is women cry more than men. But emotional reactions are not just crying. It can be being very angry. Insecurity can lead to both being very to crying, as it can lead to being angry and violent. And when I talk about gender responses, it's like very stereotypical. That's what genders are. We talked about that before. But this violence that stems from male insecurity and male fragility, I feel like we see it in Bacon's response to his paintings that he didn't like, where he destroyed them. Like, he didn't just throw them out. He actually destroyed them with a Stanley knife. Sometimes he'd have other people destroy them. But I can just imagine, and maybe he wasn't even angry about it. Maybe he was just serenely cutting his canvases up, with classical music in the background. But the way he talks about it, the way he's passionate about art and about the way he's critical about himself, I feel like it's not too much of a leap to say that he was insecure. I have a segment in the video on Bacon, how he says he tends to destroy his better art, and he thinks he can make it better, but he can't. And then he's very disappointed in himself, and he feels like his painting is destroyed, that he destroyed him with his intentions of making it better, because he can't live up to the expectations that he has. And I feel like the insecurity leads to violence individually, and we can see that's as being individually performed by the artist. But I think it's a great analogy for more socially, and we've seen that very often right now with a lot of especially young men who are insecure. Socially, it leads to violence, and we can look at that through many lenses. I think Andrew Tate is a good example of that insecurity. This whole anti-trans women, or trans people in general, but when people think about anti-trans people, they think about trans women, and I think that also stems from insecurity coming from men. Anti-feminism, which is, I guess, less of a popular topic now, but was more in 2016. We'll come back to that when I talk about my own ventures in the alt-right. But all of this feeds in this insecurity and this fragility, especially in young men, that I myself felt when I was younger. I don't know if any of you can also relate to that, to the idea of being insecure, not only as a guy, but especially when you're young. But the whole idea of young men being instrumentalized for right-wing movements has been confirmed throughout history. But yeah, the whole idea, for example, Nazis, talking about degeneracy, talking about being outperformed by another race of people, in the sense of they're stealing from you. They're controlling your media, all that. I feel like that has a very, in terms of power, it nails into that insecurity of men feeling powerless. Women can also feel powerless, but women historically have been made to feel powerless. But when men feel powerless, that's when they get very, very defensive. And that's when, for example, a lot of right-wing talking points would be you are feeling less and less heard. You are feeling less, more and more oppressed as a the the hip term right now is straight white male. As a straight white male, you are feeling disempowered, and that creates a feeling of insecurity. And I feel like that feeling of insecurity is very genuine in the sense that they actually feel very insecure, even though we agree, at least much of my chat, I think, agree that they have a lot, like straight white men have a lot of power. We agree on that. They still feel insecure because a lot of people who do feel insecure are not privileged. So a lot of white guys, but guys in general, not just white guys, I think it's guys in general, but a lot of white guys will turn to the right because they feel so, or at least they're told that they're being so attacked, and that feels that insecurity makes them want to attack back. It's like fight or flight, and these people think that by fighting they can reinforce their masculinity. Yeah, victimization. JVB says victimization is a key component of Nazi, MAGA, etc. It always has been, right? And it's often victimization of men. We don't talk about victimization of women. That doesn't lead to like outcry. Men are used to have they're used to having that position of power, and they're being robbed of it. For example, you are supposed to be the provider. A lot of men feel emasculated from having their partner have a higher income, which to me is insane. But you feel less of a man if your partner has a bigger income. Well, if your girlfriend or your wife has a bigger income than you, that exemplifies this fragility, and you can't be the provider in that case. And there's many values that you can't be anymore, like showing off your strength has less and less, at least physical strength has less and less of you can't really show it off anymore. Like, in which parts of society now can you show off your strength, aside from maybe sports, which people don't watch, like amateur sports? Maybe perhaps before you could show off your strength through, well, people used to fight much more interpersonally. I have great stories of my grandfather saying that he used to fight every weekend at every weddings. Why? Oh, because we just like to fight. It was a way to show your masculinity. But those avenues to show off your strength now aren't there because I guess we got civilized. And a lot of men that want to affirm their masculinity or feel like they're not masculine enough don't know how to prove it. So they turn to models and figures and movements that say you can prove your manliness. Technopada with 20 euros donation. Thank you so much. I would like to add an example about what you say. In late Latin America, there's a rise of Nazi and far-right ideologies, and all of them are always insecure about being white and trying to show it. Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, descendants of colonizers have like to have this distinction, and I feel like this kind of distinction gives you power, and this power is masculating in a way. Gives you, it shows, like, because like we associate masculinity to power. So if you have power, then you are masculine. Margot says, I don't understand the idea that MAGA, etc. are victimized in their view. It really seems their main motivation is to suppress marginalized identities / hate. The victim thing feels like a ploy. It varies. I really, that's something I strongly believe. Maybe one day I can have my mind changed, but I strongly believe that MAGA, far-right, fascist people do really believe in their victimization. And this hate and the marginalized identities that they direct that hate to, they don't see it as hate, and they don't even see it as exclusivity, because they perceive that these marginalized identities as threatening their own identity. It's wrong, obviously, but they actually do feel that, right? I also do believe, and maybe I'm wrong, but that a lot of Nazis, maybe not the Nazi leaders, and maybe the Nazi leader actually but people who adhered to Nazi ideology back in the 40s in Germany actually believed that Jews were corrupting their society, that all this decadence and this degeneracy actually was because of the Jews. I'm sure they like it wasn't just a ploy to excuse their hatred. I think they actually believed it, or they were manipulated into believing it. Like a lot of people who hate trans people right now, I don't think that they wouldn't even say themselves that they hate them. They'll use the same talking points of them threatening not their identities, but their threatening their children, for example. Not only through grooming, but through I've heard that like the mutilation and all those terms that they use to make it sound like scarier than it is. But I do think that they believe in that. I don't think that they're doing it out of, again, a Machiavellian plot and they're actually evil. I think they actually do believe that they're victimized in a way. I've talked to more right-leaning white men, and they think, hey, look how unfair it is, like right now you just need to be a black woman and you can be hired anywhere. It's so hard to be a white man now because now they have quotas for everything, and I can't, even if I want a promotion in my company, well, if I'm a white guy, it's gonna be harder for me. And these people actually believe that, they actually feel like they're being mistreated unfairly. They're being treated unfairly. They believe that. And that leads them to actually have positions that, that lead them to harmful ideologies. I don't think it's an excuse. I think they actually believe in it. Because I think most people want the betterment of society. I don't think anybody says oh, I want the world to be worse for black people. If they do, it's because okay, no, never mind. Some people do believe that, but I think most people who would advocate for policies or against, for example, trans people or against black people, actually think that they're doing something right for society. Even if it's create your own ethnostate, black people to their own, white people to their own, they actually believe that this would make a more cohesive and a better society for them. They're wrong, again, but I think their intentions are actually good. They're just idiots and bigots, but they don't think they're bigots. Most people say, I'm not racist, but I'm not transphobic, but, right? They don't want to accept their own bigotry because they think that they're actually, because in their heads, bigotry means bad person, and I'm not a bad person. I want the people to feel good. UO says this is how hate towards groups of other people start. I think that is how it starts. Yeah, Marco says, I agree to an extent. I think there is a way to reconcile that they have a genuine fear and that they have hate. Yeah, I think, well, if in their logical framework, if you believe that trans ideology is actually trying to have your kids mutilate their own genitalia, and that it's being taught in schools, blah blah blah, their whole the whole satanic panic for trans people, I would, if you believe that, you have to also have hate. If you believe in those premises, it's normal to have hate for these people, right? If you believe that Jews are controlling society and that they're making it objectively worse and that they're creating so much suffering, you would go into hatred of Jews. Why wouldn't you? You actually believe that they're doing so much harm. It's just that the premises are objectively wrong. Dark Water says, "Forgive them for what they know, not for they know not what they do." Basically, Mr. Penguin says a lot of ideals are also based in religion too. Yeah. That's a good way. When we talk about hatred and all that, it's excusing bigotry or ways of justifying bigotry, right? It can be fear, as we've seen with trans ideology. At one point, it was black men going for white women. that was like a fear that also feeds into this emasculating kind of tendency of being men being very insecure about their masculinity and going to the far right because they see black men trying to overpower them through their, their sexual drives, or, those facts that they believe in but that are not true, right? Yeah, religion is a good way to justify this hatred. It's a really good way because it's very hard to argue against religion because it's unfalsifiable. However, in terms of religion, like I said, there's are there religious anarchists? It talks about arguments that religious people have had for anarchism and for more tolerance and for the abolition of hierarchy. Look at my internet being a champ right here. This is embarrassing. I'm going back to my... Pano says organized religion should be destroyed, bro. Bolsheviks 101. Yeah. Does that really work though? Can you actually do that? I was talking about that with friends from I also have YouTube channels, and they were talking about how very often people switch to the very opposite of what they used that they were brought up as. Like if you're brought up conservative, you're very often going to like adopt the very opposite, or if you're brought up Christian, very often you might adopt the very opposite, and even compensate for that past. The same way I grew up and I was alt-right, and I changed to anarchism. But I think it's because one of the reasons for that is because when you're brought up and you're told something and you believe in it unconditionally without criticism, then when you do criticize it, you're like, I was misled this whole time. I think there are ways of educating with a lot of critical thinking in that education, but very often education is just, we're throwing facts at you and you have to believe them. For religion, that's the case, and very often people grow out of religion because they feel like disillusioned from the religious education they had, and I understand that, because I've had that similar process for other things. Because when you start critically looking at things that you haven't critically thought of, then you go the opposite way. If you want to destroy religion, I don't know. Like if you're just very anti-religious in your education, you might create people who it's like anti-drug awareness ads where they show you the dangers of marijuana, right? They show you the dangers of cocaine, and then you smoke a joint. It's legal in Canada. I can say that you can smoke a joint, and things are fine. You're not an addict, and you're not like overdosing in the corner in the corner of the room, right? So because you were like indoctrinated without critical thought, when you actually engage with those ideas, or with, in that case, substances, you realize, well, there's more nuance to this. And that's when very often you reject your initial education in that sense. Paige says political ideology and religious ideology are similar, so similar that both are banned from the dinner table. They push the same buttons. I agree with that. I don't think it should be, though. I think you should be able to talk. I think people don't know how to talk about these things. I am one of them. We're not taught to debate politics, to debate religion. As I've said in like the last video when we spoke to these transphobes in chat, or bigots against, or people who don't recognize women as trans women as women, I was very civil. But had they been on a dinner table without the camera on me, I might have been a bit more angry at them, right? But we should really learn to be able to debate, because it's so important to debate politics and religion. And a lot of people don't do it because they're afraid, and we've socially said that it was unacceptable to do that. But it makes for people who are religiously and ideologically uncritical. I think debate is very important for that. Not in the sense of I don't think a debate is important in the sense of convincing your opponents, but to plant the seed in your opponent's brain. or make your arguments or normalizing your arguments to your opponent. Because the more they hear that argument, the more they're going to be convinced by it. It's a psychological tool that's been proven. If you hear something more like often enough, eventually it'll convince you. And I think debates are good for that. Right? Maybe it won't convince you. I've heard a lot of anti-trans arguments, but if the arguments are good, they might convince you. They have a better time of convincing you if you hear them long enough, because you'll be thinking about them, like consciously or subconsciously. You'll be thinking about them, and your brain will process this information, and eventually, you might not come to to the conclusion of your opponent during the debate, but you might come to that conclusion naturally on your own, and that's when you become the most, convinced. Jordan Mintz says it's horrific. Like, Jordan Mintz takes a step back and says it's horrific how quickly the talking points escalate. Within a year or two, we've gone from trans girls have an unfair advantage in girls' sports to they're transing the kids. And now some states have introduced to ban medical transition for everyone, including consenting adults. I know. And it's this escalation, which is really, really quick, is scary and does give credence to the idea that a genocide is either happening right now or is in the works of happening. When does a genocide happen? Like, it's really hard to say. When did the Holocaust start? There's no date. It's a process. But yeah, the erasure of trans people is on its way in the United States. But keep in mind, the reason why the erasure is happening is because trans people are becoming more vocal, are becoming more powerful, are becoming more normalized, and more people are being are okay with different identities, gender identities, sexual identities. And I feel like that escalation from the conservative side is a political strategy that's very risky, not only for the security and lives of trans people, but for their own movement. Because I feel like the more they go into that radical rhetoric, the more people will reject it. And you've seen polls where people accept trans people. It's being normalized. People are accepting trans people. It's becoming more and more normalized. And the more conservatives are taking this so seriously and so dramatically, the more they'll alienate themselves from the public. What we have to be careful about, though, is even if the public are against them, they can still have power. But I think they're also giving power to trans people by trying to oppress them in a very, very obscure way, but like in the sense that by trying to repress them more and more, people are like, it's like beating someone who's already very vulnerable. People will defend those vulnerable people, because why are you beating on trans people? What's your problem? Why are you doing that? But I feel like trans people have the opportunity to gather more sympathy from the greater public. And I think they will, and I think they already are. Which is also a good thing. It's a great thing. Yeah, it didn't work in the midterms. Exactly, Paige. Yeah, the Daily Wire is pushing that transphobia super hard, and it's not really working. It's emboldening people who are already transphobic, but I don't know. And I've had people who in my own family who don't feel like they're political, but they've become transphobic because I think of the general information around this topic. But I feel like asking them, like, why do you care so much? I feel like that's because a lot of conservatives will be like, the don't tread on me. I don't want to, people can do whatever they want. More like the libertarian kind of like conservatism. Even the religious one, I feel like is losing power. It's like, why do you care so much? You care more about gender identity than like trans people. A lot of them do. I'm sure a lot of GOP candidates and congressmen and congresswomen care more about gender identity than many trans people. It's like, why do you care so much? And to add to that, because I want to be positive about this, young people are are not only more trans than any other generation before, but are more supporting of trans people. Things are looking up. All of this is in the same segment as male or masculinity, like fragile masculinity, insecurity, and bacon. Orange says, to bring it back to masculine fragility and all that, Orange says, that is a good point. The attention and sympathy is causing jealousy somewhere deep in the heart of the bully. I think a lot of people in general who feel very, very disempowered, and that's a lot of people. In the United States, it's a lot of people who feel disempowered. And they see trans people get attention, and they don't. The white guy doesn't feel like he's getting attention, though he's living a life of misery. You know, the poor white guy. By poor, I don't mean like, oh, the poor white guy. I mean like the impoverished white guy. He doesn't feel like he's getting sympathy. He doesn't feel like he's being heard. His conditions are getting better. But that trans woman, you know, she's getting sympathy from the public, and people are accepting her and are saying that she's brave for being who she is. How many times have you heard, like, you know, Black History Month? Well, where's my White History Month, right? Or like on Women's Day and things like that. Well, some guys will be like, where's my Men's Day? I think they actually feel like they're not being heard, and it creates insecurity, and it creates, I think there is a jealousy, especially when you're impoverished, or that you feel like you're being mistreated or treated unfairly, like many of these people are, because they can't see their privilege. We've talked about that before as well. When you're in a position of privilege, it's very hard to understand that privilege, especially if you don't live around people who are disprivileged. For example, if you're white and you only hang out with white people, and you talk about, you know, you compare yourself to white people and you say, oh my God, I'm so disprivileged, but you don't live around Black people, then you don't notice how your whiteness can actually benefit you in some other ways. Same thing for, we'll be honest, a lot of people who are transphobic don't know trans people. Never met them, never engaged or talked to a trans woman or a trans man, never talked to a non-binary person, of course not. So they don't understand, like, it's very hard to compare your own experience with theirs. And even worse, you know, like, it's already hard to compare your own experience to other people's experiences because they're so unique in very different ways. I love talking about this, by the way. And one day I'll have chat working so that it will be more engaging. I feel like it's working a bit. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Gnome's Child the Debased says, speaking as a libertarian, it sucks that people under the same name try to suppress personal expression so hard. Very anti-American. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that from a libertarian. I disagree with libertarians, obviously, but I do believe that there is this patriotism and this nationalism that can be used to protect the rights of trans people. Yeah, saying that it's very anti-American to be anti-trans. To me, it's not that compelling to me, but in terms of political efficacy, it might work on other people. Saying, why are you against trans people? You know, that's very anti-American of you. They can be whoever they want. That's the land of the free, land of, you know, you can be whoever you are if you want to be. Being trans is the epitome of being an American. You're a true patriot if you're trans. It's like with the Anarchist FAQ episode on religion. When we talk about religion, it can be a good way to pull people to the left by using religious rhetoric. How effective it is, I don't know, but especially in terms of trans rights, like, even if it's not that effective, we have to try. And Anti-Fantastique says, I think a lot of the people who complain about Women's Day, Black History Month, trans people, etc., are missing community in their life and feeling lonely. Yes, absolutely. A lot of times these people are white men. Like, loneliness, especially in white men, is super strong, and their masculinity is alienating them. We're still in the segment, I guess, of insecurity and manliness. And you feel lonely because you don't have much community. Because this whole self-sufficiency those masculine traits, which make you very lonely, are super alienating. And then you're like, why don't I have a day for me to celebrate my contributions to history? I don't think it should happen. Like, I sympathize, because like Black History Month gives, highlights like the Black community. Women's Day, highlights women's contributions and women's struggles throughout history, and gives that community, between women. Trans people in general have a very tight knit community. Women usually have tight knit communities as well. Men don't. And even when they do, all my friends, most of them are women. I don't know what to talk about with a guy. I don't look at sports. I remember trying to talk to my grandfather, who's now dead. It was really hard having a conversation with him. When you called him on the phone, it's like, well, we talk, about the hockey game. Very often it's the hockey. I don't watch hockey. Even then, it's like very hard to have those conversations with other men in your life because of that, because it's always mediated through this veneer of masculinity, which is very, very alienating. And even though I don't consider myself a man, I consider myself non-binary, I have been brought up my whole life with those characteristics. Yatuki said something about how a lot of their trans friends hate the trans agenda kind of whole idea. It's a far right talking point. It takes different variations throughout history. It used to be the Judeo-Bolshevik agenda. It used to be the feminist agenda. It's always an agenda, right? That they're trying to push through media, that they're trying to push through education. Their analysis of the world is very conspiratorial, in the sense that, when it comes to trans ideology, well, it's being pushed in by people in power, people, the woke left that has infiltrated media, that has infiltrated education, that has infiltrated the highest stance of our government. Trade that for Jews, and you have Nazis. It's very conspiratorial. It's a very conspiratorial vision of the world, and it's a very dangerous one. But my analysis of the world, a more socialist one, we'll say, or whatever, is more on the systemic. And I feel like that has a lot. It's a harder one to adhere to, because it's much more complicated. When you instead of looking at conspiracies and a group of people are trying to to manipulate and control, you see that in media, you see that in movies. It's a lot easier to imagine. But when you talk about broader systems that are impersonal and that are intangible, that's the kind of analysis that's harder, but it's it's so much more coherent, a lot more coherent. So it's trying to communicate that coherence in that analysis. Let's make a systemic analysis rather than a conspiratorial one. And if we can convince people to do that, I feel like we'll have a lot more people on our side. It's just a lot of work and a lot of synthesizing. Eric Roskam Dutch Bees brings up an amazing point, saying, I think it's more that we are supposed to be a leader figure as a man. That's what we are brought to be. And weakness like crying and being vulnerable is not the place in the family. Absolutely. Well, you can't have any weakness or show any weakness, which is very hard. And like I was talking about, one of the values of masculinity of being self-sufficient, and you have to be able to support yourself, and you shouldn't be able to need anyone. The best example I can give, and I hope a lot of people can relate to it. If you're a guy and you're going to a store, like a retail store, with a woman, and you're looking for a specific article, the woman will have no shame at all asking for help from a clerk. But the guy, and I was brought up as a guy, so I feel the same exact way. I do not want to ask anybody for help to find a specific book if I go to a bookstore, or a specific like the most recent was when I was looking for a plumbing article in a hardware store. Do you know how many different articles or different sizes of different rings for different types of pipes there are in like the plumbing section of a hardware store. I didn't want any help. I can take care of myself by myself with the help of anyone, especially not with the help of another man who can, with his superior knowledge, emasculate me by helping me out. I'm no wimp. I'm not, I don't need the help of another man. So I don't ask for their help. But fuck, that's stupid. I can, I could get it a lot easier if I was willing to not be self-sufficient. And the leader figure is part of that, and not having any vulnerability or not crying. We're brought up that way, and it's super toxic. And the leader figure as a man as well is dangerous because not only being a leader takes a lot of energy and a lot of responsibility, and you can still be a leader, but being a leader today and being a leader 50 years ago, and especially in a family unit, is so different. Like right now, you can't go as a man and discipline your wife as you could 50 years ago. Being a leader 50 years ago is treating your wife as you treat your kids. And that was beating them with a stick, I guess. Maybe not 50 years ago. That was in the 70s. Maybe 70 years ago, in the 50s. But now the nuances and your relationship with your wife, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, and your relationship with your kids is going to be so different. So, and it changed so much that your relationship with your kids is going to be so different from your own relationship with your father. And most men, especially from an older generation, will understand that they don't want to replicate their own relationship to their father, because very often that relationship was super problematic, and they have to reinvent a new way of doing a relationship with their sons and their daughters, and they don't know how. And Ballet can attest to that. The one thing that makes me cry all the time in movies and shows are fathers who fail to be fathers, who desperately try to be fathers and try to connect as hard as possible with their kids, but they can't because they don't know how to. And it's so sad to me. It's so sad. Because I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. I have kids. I'm trying to connect with them. I'm trying to get their love. I don't want to be perceived as a woman, in the sense I don't want to be caring, right? And even if I am, it might be a bit weird. I'll feel weird about it, which in effect will make my kids feel weird about it, and I don't want that. It's like, how do I have, and like, if I try to the best as I can to cultivate a relationship with my kids, and it doesn't work, they either don't care about you, or they try to also cultivate a relationship, but it's just, there's a dissonance. To me, that gets me right in the feels. It's so alienating. It's so sad. And I hope some of you, and I'm not alone in that,